All right, today we're digging into one of the 20th century's most ambitious and honestly most overlooked philosophical projects. We're unearthing a thinker who was once a giant in his field and is now, finally, stepping back into the light.
So let's kick things off with a bit of a mystery. Back in the day, if you were talking about German philosophy, a few names would immediately come up, and one of those was Nicolai Hartmann. He was right up there with the famous Martin Heidegger. But as you know, Heidegger's name is everywhere now. Hartmann's? Well, it just kind of faded away. The big question is, why?
I mean, this timeline really tells the whole story, doesn't it? For about 30 years, Hartmann was a central figure, a big deal. Then he dies in 1950 and poof, he pretty much vanishes. It was kind of a perfect storm, you know? Heidegger's influence just kept growing, Hartmann's writing style wasn't exactly trendy, and almost none of his work was translated in English. So he just got forgotten. Until now, that is. In our century, people started digging his work up again, and what they found was kind of mind-blowing.
So what was this big idea? What's causing this huge revival? Well, it all starts with a really powerful but actually pretty simple idea about how the world is put together. Hartmann looked around at the science and philosophy of his time and thought, you guys are getting something fundamentally wrong.
He saw this trend of reductionism everywhere, this idea that you can explain something complex, like love, by just looking at brain chemistry, or explain a whole society by just talking about biological instincts. And he said, no, that's a huge mistake. You're taking this rich, multi-layered world and squashing it flat. He was convinced reality was way, way more interesting than that. And this is his solution. It's brilliant. He imagined reality as a kind of four-story building. On the ground floor, you've got the inorganic layer. That's all the basic stuff, you know, physics, matter, atoms. Then, built on top of that, you have the organic layer, life itself. Above that, the psychic layer. This is consciousness, feelings, experience. And at the very top, he put the spiritual layer. Now hold on, this has zero to do with religion. For Hartmann, spiritual just meant the world that's uniquely human. Our culture, our laws, our language, our sense of freedom. And the key is, every single floor has its own set of rules, its own unique design. Okay, so we've got the building. Now let's look at the blueprints, because Hartmann didn't just point out the layers, he figured out the laws that connect them. And this is where you can really see what a genius he was at systematic thinking. So here's the absolute key to the whole thing. He called it the categorial novum. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple. When you go up from one floor to the next, something totally new appears, something you could have never predicted just by studying the floor below. You could study atoms for 1 billion years, and you'd never guess that they'd eventually organize themselves into a living, breathing creature. You could understand every cell in a brain, but that won't explain the feeling of being in love. Each new level is a genuine, unpredictable leap.
And he even came up with rules for how these floors talk to each other. First, there's the law of recurrence. This just means the rules from the lower floors don't just vanish. Basic physics still applies to a living thing, right? But, and this is a huge but, the law of modification kicks in. Those old rules get changed by the new context. The cause and effect that makes a rock fall is way simpler than what makes a person make a choice. And finally, the law of distance just confirms it. Moving between these layers isn't a gentle slope, it's a jump.
And this all leads to this really fascinating, kind of mind-bending paradox at the heart of reality. On one hand, you have the law of strength. The lower layers are always stronger because they're the foundation. No atoms, no life. Simple as that. But then you have the law of freedom. The higher layers, even though they depend on the lower ones, are actually freer. They have more options, more autonomy. A human has more freedom than a rock. So as Hartmann said, the simple is stronger, but the rich is freer.
So why does any of this matter for how we think today? Well, what Hartmann gives us is an incredibly powerful tool for avoiding a really common mental trap, one that you see everywhere, from scientific debates to how we talk about politics.
He basically diagnosed this core error in thinking that he called categorial boundary transgression. Yeah, it's a mouthful, but this old saying captures the idea perfectly. It's the mistake of using the wrong tool for the job, of trying to fix everything with the same hammer. In plain English, it means you can't use the rules from one floor of the building to explain what's happening on another. You don't analyze a poem with the laws of physics. Each layer of reality needs its own set of tools, its own way of being understood. When we mix them up, we don't get a deeper truth, we just get a mess.
And these examples just nail it, don't they? I mean, of course a novel is made of ink and paper, but that tells you literally nothing about its story. Of course our brains fire neurons, but does that really explain the experience of seeing the color red? Hartmann's whole model gives us a way to say, aha, that's why this explanation feels so empty. You're using ground floor rules to try and explain what's happening on the top floor. You're completely missing what's new, that categorial novum.
So, let's bring this all back to his big comeback. Why are thinkers today blowing the dust off these books from the 1940s? Well, it's because these so-called forgotten ideas speak directly to some of the biggest challenges we're facing right now.
It turns out Hartmann was so far ahead of his time, it's not even funny. I mean, look at this. The idea of emergence, which is huge in biology and philosophy of mind today, yeah, that's his categorial novum, just 40 years earlier. These super technical debates people are having right now about ontological grounding, he laid out the basic rules 60 years ago. The whole new realism movement from the 2000s, his entire project of critical ontology was basically an 80-year head start. The guy had already built the tools that modern philosophy was just starting to look for.
And this isn't just some historical fun fact. His work gives us a really solid toolkit for today's problems. It gives us a way to talk about the mind that doesn't just reduce it to the brain. It helps us explain how life depends on physics, but is also its own thing. It's even useful for fields like environmental ethics, helping us talk about the complex, layered value of nature. He built a system that lets us see the connections without collapsing everything into one thing.
So in the end, what Nicolai Hartmann gives us is this incredible, rediscovered architecture for reality. It's a map that respects the complexity of everything, from an atom all the way up to a work of art, without trying to explain one away with the other. And it kind of leaves us with a question, doesn't it? If we stop looking at the world as this flat, one-dimensional thing, what new structures, what new layers are we going to start seeing all around us?